WWE just did the unthinkable, and if you're not absolutely furious right now, then you haven't been paying attention to what actually happened backstage after SmackDown last night. Triple H, the same man who talks about respecting the business, about building long-term storylines, about creating an environment where talent can thrive and succeed, just fired Nick Aldis and the Vision for doing their jobs, for standing up to Centimeter Punk's constant rule-breaking and ego-driven chaos, for trying to maintain order and professionalism on a show that Punk has turned into his personal playground where consequences don't exist and authority means nothing. And before you tell me this is a work, before you say this is just another storyline and I'm getting worked into a shoot, let me tell you something right now that's going to blow your mind and make you question everything you thought you knew about how WWE operates. Multiple sources backstage are confirming that Nick Aldis and the Vision, Tyler Bate and Trent Seven, are legitimately gone from the company. Their profiles have been removed from WWE's internal roster system, their merchandise has been pulled from the shop, and they were escorted out of the arena last night by security after a heated confrontation with Triple H where voices were raised and threats were made and the entire situation nearly turned physical. This isn't a storyline. This isn't building to some big return or redemption arc. This is WWE's chief content officer making a decision that prioritizes Centimeter Punk's happiness over the integrity of his on-screen authority structure, over the careers of three talented performers who were just doing what they were told to do, over the basic principle that rules and consequences should apply to everyone equally regardless of how much money they make or how much political power they have backstage. And I am going to spend the next however many minutes breaking down exactly why this decision is not just wrong but catastrophically damaging to WWE's credibility, to SmackDown storytelling coherence, and to the message it sends every single person in that locker room about what behavior gets rewarded and what behavior gets punished in Triple H's version of WWE. Let me take you through the sequence of events that led to these firings because the context matters and it reveals just how egregious and unjustified this decision actually is. For the past 3 months, Centimeter Punk has been running wild on SmackDown doing whatever he wants, attacking wrestlers during their matches, interrupting segments he's not part of, ignoring direct orders from management, and generally acting like the rules that apply to everyone else don't apply to him because he's Centimeter Punk and he's above accountability. Nick Aldis, as SmackDown general manager, has been trying to rein Punk in through reasonable authority figure measures like fines, stipulations, putting him in difficult matches, all the standard tools that on-screen management has used forever to create drama and maintain some semblance of order. And Punk has responded to every one of these attempts with defiance, disrespect, and increasingly aggressive confrontations where he's made it clear that he doesn't recognize Aldis' authority and doesn't care what consequences Aldis threatens him with. This came to a head 2 weeks ago when Aldis put Punk in a match with a stipulation that if Punk got disqualified, he'd be suspended for 30 days. Punk won the match clean, but afterward he got on the microphone and demanded a public apology from Aldis for what Punk characterized as harassment and abuse of power. WWE, in their infinite wisdom, decided to give Centimeter Punk exactly what he wanted. They had Nick Aldis come out on live television and apologize to Punk for doing his job, for trying to enforce basic rules and standards of conduct. Aldis delivered that apology through gritted teeth, clearly hating every word he was forced to say, while Punk stood there soaking it in with that insufferable smug expression on his face. And when Aldis finished his prepared statement and offered his hand for a handshake to symbolize moving past the conflict, Punk looked at that extended hand, rejected it, told Aldis that an apology wasn't enough to undo the damage, and then walked away leaving Aldis looking like a complete fool in front of millions of viewers. That segment destroyed whatever credibility Nick Aldis had left as an authority figure, made him look weak and ineffective, sent a message to every heel on the SmackDown roster that they could ignore his directives without real consequences. But it gets worse, so much worse, because what happened last night on SmackDown was the direct result of WWE emboldening Centimeter Punk to believe he's untouchable. Last night's show featured a segment where Centimeter Punk was scheduled to address his upcoming match at the next pay-per-view. Standard stuff, Punk would cut a promo building hype for his opponent, maybe have a brief confrontation, set the stakes for their eventual encounter. But Centimeter Punk being Centimeter Punk decided that wasn't enough, decided he needed to make the segment about himself and his ongoing conflict with SmackDown management. So he started cutting a promo about how Nick Aldis is the worst general manager in SmackDown history, how Aldis has been trying to sabotage his career since day one, how the entire authority structure on SmackDown is corrupt and designed to hold down talented wrestlers like himself who don't play political games. It was vintage Centimeter Punk self-righteous victim complex material, positioning himself as the rebel fighting against an unjust system even though he's literally the most protected and privileged wrestler on the entire roster. And Nick Aldis, instead of just taking it like he's been forced to take Punk's disrespect for months, finally snapped. Aldis came out to the ring with the Vision, Tyler Bate and Trent Seven, who've been his backup and enforcement over the past few weeks as tensions with Punk escalated. Aldis got in Punk's face and told him that he was done being disrespected, done being Punk's punching bag, done apologizing for doing his job. He said that if Punk had a problem with how SmackDown was being managed, he could take it up with Triple H backstage like a professional instead of airing his grievances on live television and undermining the show's authority structure. And Centimeter Punk, instead of backing down or engaging in a verbal back and forth that would build to a future confrontation, got physical. He shoved Nick Aldis backward into the ropes, and when Tyler Bate and Trent Seven stepped forward to protect Aldis and separate the two, Punk started throwing punches at them, initiating a 3-on-1 brawl that the cameras captured in all its chaotic intensity. Security rushed the ring to break things up, referees and producers came out to separate everyone, and the segment ended with Centimeter Punk standing tall in the ring while Nick Aldis and the Vision were being held back and escorted to the backstage area. That's where things went from scripted television to real-world consequences. According to multiple people who were there, Nick Aldis went directly to Triple H's office after that segment, absolutely furious about what had just happened. Aldis argued that Centimeter Punk had gone off script, that the physical confrontation wasn't planned or approved, that Punk putting his hands on an authority figure and making him look weak yet again was destroying any remaining credibility the general manager character had. Tyler Bate and Trent Seven backed him up, corroborating that nothing about that segment went the way it was supposed to go, that they were told to come out and have a verbal confrontation with Punk that would set up future storylines but instead got pulled into an unplanned brawl. And Triple H, instead of supporting his on-screen authority figure, instead of acknowledging that Centimeter Punk had overstepped and needed to be reined in, sided with Punk. According to the reports, Triple H told Aldis that Punk was right to push back, that the authority figure role had become stale and needed to be refreshed, that Aldis wasn't connecting with audiences the way WWE needed him to. And when Aldis pushed back, when he argued that he'd only been doing what creative had told him to do and that it was impossible to be an effective authority figure when the biggest star on the show was allowed to ignore and disrespect him constantly, Triple H made the decision right there to terminate his contract effective immediately. Tyler Bate and Trent Seven, hearing this conversation unfold, stepped in to defend Aldis. They pointed out that this was unfair, that Aldis was being scapegoated for Centimeter Punk's behavior, that firing someone for doing their job properly sent a terrible message to the rest of the roster. And Triple H, according to witnesses, told them that if they had a problem with his decision, they could leave too. So they did. Tyler Bate and Trent Seven, two incredibly talented wrestlers who've been cornerstones of NXT UK and then the main roster tag division, chose loyalty to their friend and principal over their paychecks. They walked out with Nick Aldis, and WWE let them go without trying to change their minds or negotiate some kind of resolution. 3 wrestlers, gone from the company because they dared to confront Centimeter Punk and because they had the audacity to expect that their boss would support them when they were put in impossible situations by the company's golden boy. The sheer hypocrisy of this situation is staggering. Triple H has spent his entire reign as head of creative talking about how he wants to build stars, how he wants long-term storytelling, how he respects wrestlers and values the contributions of everyone on the roster regardless of their position on the card. He's positioned himself as the anti-Vince McMahon, the enlightened leader who listens to talent and creates an environment where people can succeed. And then he fires 3 people for standing up to Centimeter Punk, for trying to do their jobs in the roles he assigned them, for expecting basic support from management when they are being undermined and disrespected by the company's most protected star. What message does that send to everyone else in the locker room? It tells them that if you're Centimeter Punk, you can do whatever you want without consequences. But if you're anyone else, if you're in a supporting role or a mid-card position, you better not make waves or push back or expect fair treatment because you're expendable and Centimeter Punk isn't. Let's talk about Nick Aldis specifically because his firing is particularly egregious and unjustified. Nick Aldis was brought into WWE specifically to be SmackDown general manager because he had credibility, because he'd been the NWA World Heavyweight Champion for over 1,000 days and carried that promotion during a difficult period, because he's a respected veteran who understands the business and could be taken seriously in an authority role. WWE chose him for that position. WWE wrote the storylines where he had to conflict with Centimeter Punk. WWE told him to enforce rules and create obstacles for Punk that would generate drama and give audiences a reason to care about their interactions. Aldis did exactly what he was hired to do, and he did it well, delivering promos effectively, selling the frustration and anger of being constantly undermined, trying to maintain dignity while being systematically humiliated. And his reward for being a good company man who executed the creative he was given? Termination. Fired because Centimeter Punk complained that the authority figure storyline wasn't working for him, even though Punk himself was the one refusing to sell the authority figure's power or treat the role with any respect. Tyler Bate and Trent Seven losing their jobs over this is tragic because they are incredible talents who could have had long successful careers in WWE. Tyler Bate is only 27 years old and he's already one of the best technical wrestlers in the world, capable of having classic matches with anyone, beloved by hardcore fans who appreciate pure wrestling ability. Trent Seven is a fantastic character worker who's versatile enough to work as a face or heel, who's been a mentor to younger talent, who's consistently delivered in every role he's been given. These are exactly the kind of wrestlers Triple H should want to build his company around, loyal professionals who do good work and support their colleagues and add value to every show they are on. But they made the mistake of standing up to Centimeter Punk and expecting their boss to have their backs, and now they are unemployed. Meanwhile, Centimeter Punk, who's caused more backstage problems and created more dysfunction in his few years back with WWE than most wrestlers create in entire careers, gets exactly what he wants with no consequences whatsoever. The broader implications of this decision are terrifying for WWE's creative direction and workplace culture. If Triple H is willing to fire people to keep Centimeter Punk happy, what does that mean for future storylines and character decisions? If a top star doesn't like how they are being booked, can they just complain and get people fired until the creative changes to suit them? Does Triple H even have creative control anymore, or is he just executing Centimeter Punk's vision for what SmackDown should be? These are not hypothetical concerns, these are real questions about power dynamics and decision-making that will affect every storyline and every wrestler going forward. Authority figures in wrestling need to have credibility and power that feels real even within the fictional universe. When you establish that the authority figure can be disrespected, ignored, and eventually gotten fired just by complaining to the boss, you've destroyed the entire concept of on-screen management having any meaning or consequences. How is WWE going to book a new SmackDown general manager now? Who's going to take that job knowing that if Centimeter Punk doesn't like you, you'll be fired? And how are audiences supposed to take that new authority figure seriously when they've just watched what happened to the last one? The talent reaction to these firings is going to be crucial. If other wrestlers speak up in support of Nick Aldis and the vision, if they publicly criticize this decision or express concern about the precedent it sets, that could force Triple H to reconsider or at least acknowledge that there's a serious problem with how this situation was handled. But if everyone stays silent, if the locker room is too afraid of political repercussions to say anything, that tells you everything you need to know about the culture Triple H has created, where loyalty to Centimeter Punk is valued above fairness, consistency, and basic respect for the people who work hard every week to make the shows successful. I've already seen some wrestlers posting cryptic messages on social media that seem to reference this situation, vague statements about loyalty and integrity that could be interpreted as commentary on the firings. But nobody's been willing to directly say this was wrong, Nick Aldis didn't deserve this, Triple H made a mistake, because everyone knows that kind of public criticism could cost them their own jobs. Centimeter Punk's role in all of this is the most infuriating part because he's going to escape any accountability or consequences despite being the root cause of this entire situation. Punk created the conflict with Nick Aldis through his constant disrespect and rule-breaking. Punk escalated the physical confrontation last night by shoving Aldis and throwing punches at the Vision. Punk complained to Triple H about the authority figure storyline not working, even though the only reason it wasn't working was Punk's refusal to cooperate with the creative and sell the authority figure's power. And now Punk gets to continue his career without the annoying obstacle of an authority figure who tries to hold him accountable, gets to operate in an environment where he's proven he can get people fired just by expressing his displeasure, gets to be even more insufferable and self-righteous knowing that WWE management will always take his side over anyone else's. This is exactly the kind of outcome that reinforces Punk's worst tendencies, that validates his belief that he's above the rules and that anyone who tries to treat him like a normal wrestler deserves to be punished. The historical parallel to this situation is Steve Austin and Mr. McMahon in the late 90s, but the crucial difference is that Vince McMahon, the authority figure in that storyline, was never actually weakened or diminished by Austin's rebel lion. Vince remained powerful and dangerous and capable of making Austin's life hell, which is what made their conflict compelling and gave it stakes. The audience believed that Vince could and would destroy Austin if given the opportunity, which made every Austin victory feel earned and significant. But WWE has systematically destroyed Nick Aldis' credibility to the point where Centimeter Punk's rebel lion doesn't feel heroic or exciting, it just feels like a bully picking on someone who can't fight back. And now they've completed that destruction by literally firing the authority figure, proving that Punk was right all along and Aldis was always powerless. That's not compelling storytelling. That's not the foundation for a legendary feud. That's just bad creative that damages everyone involved except the one person who should face some kind of consequence for his actions. The fan reaction to these firings has been swift and overwhelmingly negative. Social media is flooded with people expressing shock and anger about Nick Aldis being let go, with fans creating hashtags demanding that WWE reinstate him and the Vision, with people announcing they are canceling their subscriptions or boycotting WWE shows in protest. Wrestling journalists and podcasters are almost unanimously critical of this decision, pointing out the unfairness and the terrible precedent it sets. Even casual fans who don't normally pay attention to backstage politics or creative decisions are commenting on how wrong this feels and how it makes them less interested in watching SmackDown if this is how WWE treats people who are just trying to do their jobs. The public relations damage from this is going to be significant and long-lasting, and WWE is going to have to work hard to rebuild trust with audiences who feel betrayed by seeing good people punished for centimeter Punk's bad behavior. Triple H is going to have to address this situation publicly at some point, whether through an official statement, a media interview, or on-screen acknowledgement. The questions he'll face are straightforward and uncomfortable. Why did you fire Nick Aldis for doing the job you hired him to do? Why did you side with Centimeter Punk over your authority figure when Punk was clearly the one creating problems? What message are you sending to your roster about what behavior is acceptable and what consequences exist for insubordination? How do you plan to book authority figures going forward when you've established that complaining to you can get them fired? These are legitimate questions that deserve honest answers, but I suspect Triple H will either refuse to comment citing personnel matters being private, or he'll give some corporate non-answer about making difficult decisions to improve the product. Neither response will satisfy anyone or address the fundamental unfairness of what happened. The legal implications of these firings could be interesting depending on what was in Nick Aldis, Tyler Bate, and Trent Seven's contracts. If they had guaranteed deals with specific terms about grounds for termination, and if WWE fired them without proper cause as defined in those contracts, there could be lawsuits challenging the dismissals and seeking compensation for breach of contract. WWE has deep pockets and good lawyers, so they'd probably win any legal battle, but the discovery process and public airing of what happened could be embarrassing and damaging to the company's reputation. More likely, WWE will offer some kind of settlement to these three wrestlers in exchange for non-disclosure agreements that prevent them from publicly discussing the circumstances of their departures, which would allow WWE to control the narrative and minimize the fallout. The worst part about all of this is that it was completely avoidable. Triple H could have supported Nick Aldis and told Centimeter Punk that he needed to cooperate with the authority figure storyline because that's how the show was being structured. He could have mediated between them and found a creative solution that satisfied both parties and led to compelling television. He could have recognized that firing people to appease one star, no matter how valuable that star is, sets a terrible precedent and creates long-term problems that outweigh any short-term benefit. But instead he chose the path of least resistance, kept Centimeter Punk happy at everyone else's expense, and destroyed 3 careers in the process. And the saddest thing is that this probably won't be the last time something like this happens, because WWE has now established that if you're important enough, if you have enough pull backstage, you can get people fired simply by complaining that you don't like working with them. So here's what I need from you in the comments, and I desperately want to hear every perspective because this situation demands discussion and debate. Do you think Triple H made the right decision firing Nick Aldis and the Vision, or is this one of the worst creative and personnel decisions in recent WWE history? Do you believe Centimeter Punk should face any consequences for his role in this situation, or is it okay for top stars to have this level of power over who stays and who goes? How should WWE book SmackDown's authority structure going forward after completely destroying the credibility of the general manager role? Will you continue watching SmackDown after seeing how Nick Aldis was treated, or does this make you want to support other wrestling companies that treat their talent more fairly? And most importantly, what would you do if you were Triple H? How would you handle this situation differently to protect both Centimeter Punk's value as a star and the integrity of your authority figures and supporting cast? Because there had to be a better solution than what we got. There had to be some way to make everyone's careers better rather than destroying 3 people to benefit 1. Triple H fired Nick Aldis and the Vision for confronting Centimeter Punk, and whether you think that was justified or outrageous, you cannot deny that WWE just sent a clear message about who matters and who doesn't in their company, and that message should concern everyone who cares about fairness, consistency, and treating wrestlers with basic respect and dignity.